Carlos Vera, nice to see you. Thanks for joining us.
You too. Thank you so much for having me on, Julianna.
So as COVID cases continue to rise across the country and states impose these harsher restrictions, Americans are bracing for another round of difficult layoffs. The pandemic has exposed how unequal the economic pain has been for workers across the country. One group of people we tend to overlook is the young.
Yep.
And especially interns. Our Interns is an organization that's been fighting for these workers for years. Today, we're speaking with Our Interns co-founder, Carlos Mark Vera. Carlos, thanks so much for joining us today. Appreciate it.
Me too. Thank you for having me.
So for those of us who aren't familiar with your work, talk about Our Interns and how you came to dedicate your life to this work.
So I guess the inspiration was personal experience. I myself did 3 unpaid internships. In the White House.
Oh my, that's a lot. Okay. Yeah.
I mean, because I think you're kind of taught, well, you have to, pay your dues to kind of get your foot in the door, but it's not exactly cheap to, come to like New York City or DC to get these paid opportunities. So, I did that. And it wasn't until I talked to my mentee a couple of years later, and he mentioned that he had to skip out on buying groceries just to pay for the dry cleaning costs for his unpaid internship. Mm-hmm. So at that point, I said, you know what, this really needs to change. So I founded this organization with someone named Guillermo 4 years ago, actually. It was just our anniversary a week ago.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And the whole point of the organization is, how do we ensure that everyone has access to, work opportunities regardless of their socioeconomic income and background? Because it very much is tiered. A lot of these opportunities, whether it's journalism, government, nonprofit sector, it's all unpaid. So you kind of have to come from a certain kind of family that can afford to fork, a couple $1,000s. So that's kind of how Our Interns came to be.
I have a question for you. When you were living in New York City or in DC and you were working for free, you had to have a second job? And how many people were you living with in one house?
So I was
I know how this works.
Right. The struggle. I was one of the lucky people that was going to school in DC, which is, a big plus. But when I was doing my Hill internship, I was working a side job about 20 hours a week. I was interning about 30 hours a week. And then I was taking 6 classes.
Whoa.
Yes. And I was in a triple. And then I was in a group home up until last month. So yeah, yeah.
Unbelievable. Why is this? So talk about why this is such an important issue when it comes to equality of opportunity.
So I think the real importance of this is 3 factors. Apologies.
That's okay.
It is the fact that that intern, which may not have that much significance, ends up becoming the staff or the employee, and then they rise up the ranks, right? So like the Speaker of the House, Rep, AOC, all these people started off as actual Hill interns. You can see the same thing in journalism, so on and so forth. So those interns are tomorrow's leaders, and we need to make sure that they come from all facets. Because if you only let rich people in these positions, then they dominate our society, how our policies are written. And I think we're seeing it right now with COVID, where some of these policymakers have no clue what working class people need to survive. And they're like, oh, one check of $1,200 should last for 6 months. And it's like, sorry, we don't have trust funds. So it really matters who you have at the helm creating these policies. And that's kind of what paid internships do. Additionally, 9 out of 10 employers stated that they want college graduates with work experience. So many times, if you can't afford to do it in college, because people are like, oh, it's just optional. You graduate and you don't have the experience, you don't get hired. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
That is not good. I'm trying to think through, people who maybe aren't in school and who are working to support their families and who would like to get out of, say, the retail industry or working for minimum wage in whatever capacity, would like to move into a more career related track. That, they can't take a job that's unpaid, an internship that's unpaid. And even an intern, like, how do people in that situation get an internship, which could be, a step into a different kind of career?
So one thing I would, which I think, you rightfully pointed out, is internships are also a way to transition from careers. So one of our current team members, her name is Rose Lopez. She is a veteran, she served, she's amazing. And she's chosen to switch her careers, right? And she was saying, I'm in my 30s and yeah, it sucks being an unpaid intern. as an 18-year-old, but put yourself in my shoes, like, right? Like they have a house, they have children, and she can't really afford to do that, right? And thankfully she worked with Our Interns and now she's a full-time employee. But yes, very much internships are a way to transition. And when you just leave it unpaid, either they can't do it or they're taking out more student loans to do it.
Why are organizations allowed to not pay interns just by calling it an internship or giving you college credit in some way?
Yeah.
How is this allowed to happen?
So the Department of Labor states that internships by nature have to be educational, but we know many of them are not. So what employers say—
I had one that was like, I sat at a desk. I'm like, what am I doing here? I could at least help you file. I mean,
Right.
Really?
I'd rather get into debt if I'm doing something meaningful, right, than nothing at all.
Thank you.
What lawyers say is this internship is unpaid, but you must do college credit. Like I say, that the tricky part of that is, one thing is not getting paid for work. The other is having to pay to work for free, because you're then having to pay a couple of $1,000s to your university to do an unpaid internship.
Yep. Yeah, to get the credit for it. So you have to, so it's basically money laundering. Off your back.
Concept. And I think this also plays into the larger forces that we're seeing in the labor world, where, there's not that much regulations and oversight around these markets. And this also, I would say, kind of plays into the fact that you're seeing this trend where you're seeing all these job postings. I'm sure you've seen them gone viral, where they want you to have a master's, 3-4 years of minimum experience, and they want to pay you $14 an hour.
Yeah.
That was not the case 2-3 decades ago. And I'm seeing this more and more common, this gig economy, I would call it.
Yes, that's what they are calling it. Yes, that's so true. I used to take a lot of Lyft when I was in New York City, because I had to travel at odd, uncomfortable on the subway hours for me. Yeah. So lucky for me, my workplace paid for Lyft at 4:00 in the morning. Wow. And a lot of those Lyft drivers were actually like doing internships in other places, which is very interesting.
Yes, Uber definitely Actually, I've seen ads in DC, have an unpaid internship, work for Uber or Lyft.
Wow.
Yep.
What do you say to someone who thinks that it should be up to the individual whether or not they work for free?
Well, I would say is, if we're looking at like a supply and demand, there are some people that, if you can do it, awesome. But I would say the vast majority of Americans can't afford to drop $6,000, which is what an average internship costs. And that it basically, employers sometimes are like, well, why do I need to pay if I have a supply of young people that are willing to do it for free? Mm-hmm. So I think that's something to keep in mind. And also, like, I've sometimes heard, oh, you're there for the education, right? You're there for the experience. You're not there for pay. And, like, I can't go to the grocery store and go into the checkout line and have the cashier say, cash or credit, and say, experience, please.
Yeah. And also, a lot of times they don't give the intern, like I was saying about my internship, like you start with being around the thing and you get the coffee. Like, how educational is it to be at Starbucks getting the coffee? It's not like they give you some important work to do, generally speaking.
100%. Our tagline is experience doesn't pay the bills.
Yeah. With a potential $15 minimum wage, how does having to pay for interns affect, say, small nonprofits who rely on internship work to keep within their, to keep doing their, let's hope, excellent mission, and stay within their working budget parameters?
So Our Interns is also a small organization. We pay our interns $15 an hour. I think one of the things is it's about being very intentional, of like your budget. Like every year you kind of come up with a budget, and when you start adding it on for interns, it makes a difference. And it's also like a mix, right? Like we know some organizations that do it from their budgets, foundation money, universities, like there's no right way. And like, even though like we pay $15 an hour, we understand that not everyone's in the same case. And our thing is like, at a minimum, provide some sort of stipend, right? Like whether it's travel, food, like no one should be getting into debt to do an work opportunity. And I think that's kind of like, ideally, like, hey, if you can do $15 more, kudos to you, but like at a minimum, pay them something.
Carlos, under COVID, what's been happening to the internship system?
Oh, I mean, it's been devastating. I can give you an example of someone. Her name is Aniki. She's goes to a public university in Arizona, and back in March, her internship at a newspaper got cut. And then 2 days later, her retail job got cut. So within the same week, she lost both jobs. And then her mom, who was a server, got laid off the week after.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, this has really been devastating. And we actually predicted that up to 1/3 of internships in the summer would get canceled. And, for some people, they're like, oh, it's kind of like being a part of a book club. It's nice if you have it, but it's not the end of the world. But some folks don't understand that some young people use that income to not only help themselves, but help their family.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to step on your point about the fact that the income also helps people help their families. But I grew up as a daughter of immigrant family. So my family did not have connections. And this was before immigrants seemed to get together to lobby. It wasn't like, oh, all these people have this group now. This is happening more and more. I mean, I'm sure there was, but my family did not get involved for whatever reason. They were busy trying to make ends meet, etc. We did not have connections to the broader world of work, and a lot of the work that was being done by ourselves and the people in our situation, what was, the starter work that immigrants kind of do when they get to this country. So to get into sort of the world of white collar work or even the world of blue collar work, you often have to have connections in a certain area. Talk about the role that internships play in having connections and why it seems that if you have to do it for free, that means you already kind of have to have some basis upon which to stand, like a financial one.
That's, like you mentioned, the power of networks. Kind of the same way that we know in jobs, there's 75% of the people that get the job know someone at the organization. It's very similar to the internships. There's like, oh, can you get my son or daughter an internship? So that's very much common, but it really leaves out folks, like you mentioned, working class immigrants that just don't have those networks. So that is a big issue. And I can tell you, I remember talking to an intern coordinator or a certain elected official that shall remain nameless, that's a Democrat. And they basically said, hey, we had 10 slots. And my chief basically told me out of the 10 slots, 4 of them are reserved for the donor kids. They advertised 10, but 4 are already taken. And that's kind of how it works. So it's kind of the system that reproduces and it keeps the same people in power. Yeah.
You've been working with organizations like Sunrise and the Roosevelt Network to release a 100-day plan for young America. Talk about that.
Yeah. So, we all kind of came together and basically said, should there be a new administration, these are some of the policies that could really transform America in a way that helps young people. And it's really a call for the administration to be bold,
And young people came out and voted. So hello.
Right. And we voted and we wrote this voting, and we saw that young people really made a difference. And this really is frustrating, but most of the time we're left out of the conversations, even in some progressive circles. So this was, organizations led by youth, and it has different things, whether in the green space, education, labor. So in education, expanding the Pell Grant for former incarcerated youth. For labor, making sure that there are more paid opportunities. So basically using the federal government to help employ more young people the same way that we did, back in the day in the 1930s, 1940s when we had the recession.
Excellent. I think it's a great idea.
Don't be scared to use what we have available to help people, right?
And how have you had indications that a Biden administration would be or is going to be friendly to your proposals?
I definitely think so.
If not, you're going to push them, right?
Right. Yeah. Well, that's the thing.
Well, look out.
Right. I am hopeful. There is some sense that some things would be better. I think it's still too soon to be said. But I've been looking at some of the folks being put in transitions, and I am hopeful. And believe it or not, what I think some folks need to understand is Pay Our Interns was successful back in 2018 by getting Congress to pass $14 million to pay interns, right? First time in history. That basically passed unanimously by Republicans and Democrats. I mean, and you know this, Julianna, like, I mean, Congress is so
Good
divided.
luck with that. Yeah.
Right?
No,
They
but
couldn't-
could be good. It could
Yeah,
be.
no, they can't even agree on naming a park, and they did this. So it's like, one thing I've noticed is there's certain topics that if you say it the right way, or you like, you like, how do I say this? So the way
You
you
appeal to the
yeah, you appeal. So like when
both.
we meet to Democrats, we'd be like, hey, think of the diversity, right? And then for Republicans, we're like, hey, you know, we're trying to get the child of a coal miner or a server into these positions, right? Like, you're still working, and that works. So I do have
There you
hope.
go. That's excellent. Carlos Mark Vera is the co-founder and current executive director of Pay Our Interns. While attending American University in DC, Carlos was an unpaid intern at the White House, the European Parliament. They don't have any money, and the House of Representatives. This is insane. He knows firsthand the struggles of trying to survive while interning for free. Carlos, thanks so much for joining us. Final words. How can people get involved with Pay Our Interns?
I would say either following us on social media. It's like I said, Pay Our Interns. Speak up at your workplace. You know, we can't do this work on our own. And if you're an intern, reach out to us. We thrive on stories, right? Because until we don't speak out, you know, this is going to continue. But thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for for coming on and for all the work that you're doing. I look forward to having you on again.
Of course. Have a great day.
Hey, Mark, you're watching Act TV. If you are watching on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe. That was interesting. I love to see people doing work. I feel like so many young people are so much more empowered these days than they were when I was much, much younger. You know?